The United States, I understand the duty my country has to lead in this critical moment.
And I am aware of the attempts to make some shady dealings behind the scenes.
You remind me of our better selves in America. That there was a time in America that we were this way, fighting to the last person. We're going to be free or die.
Free or die.
Free or die.
Now you are free.
Yes.
And we will be.
And the Russians are dying.
Гнилость американской политической системы, которая не может претендовать на то, чтобы учить других демократии.
I think the Chinese are setting up the new global world order that's going to rest on China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, whatever they can pick up in the BRICS and the global south, and then they'll reset the rules of the international rules-based order to really favor themselves economically, on trade, and military possessions, and on influence in global regions, yeah.
What do you make of 100 Chinese nationals trying to get into U.S. military bases, appearing as tourists and saying, hey, all have the same story? What is with that?
Yeah, it's like they're coming in through the doors and the walls and the crack in the floor. Yeah, the Chinese are clearly penetrating United States intelligence.
The 21st century will not belong to China. It should and will belong to the United States.
Canada and Ukraine have agreed to engage with G7 partners to establish a working group of eminent persons who will provide advice on the seizure and forfeiture of Russian assets, including of the Russian Central Bank. Second, we're adding another 63 Russian individuals and entities to our sanctions list, including those complicit in the kidnapping of children and the spreading of disinformation.
Our industries and tech companies like competition. They know that global competition is good for business and that it creates and protects jobs here in Europe. But competition is only true as long as it is fair. Too often our companies are excluded from foreign markets or are victims of predatory practices. They are often undercut by competitors benefiting from huge state subsidies. We have not forgotten how China's unfair trade practices affected our solar industry.
I rise to put the leadership of the House, the Senate, and the President of the United States on notice. I will not consent to any expedited passage of any spending bill that provides any more American aid to Ukraine. It's as if no one has noticed that we have no extra money to send to Ukraine. Our deficit this year will exceed $1.5 trillion. Borrowing money from China to send it to Ukraine makes no sense. It's not as if we have some sort of rainy day fund sitting around, trillions of dollars in a pot of money, and we're just going to send that to Ukraine. We're going to borrow it. When we borrow it and create new money to pay for that borrowing, we create the inflation that is plaguing our economy. Since the beginning of Russia's war in Ukraine, the American taxpayers provided Ukraine with $113 billion. Over the 583 days of war, between February 24th, 2022 and the end of the month, that averages $6.8 billion per month or $223 million per day.
Well, good morning, everybody. And hey, we got the Duran on the program today. This is great. Alexander Christoforou, Alexander Mercouris, and Cyrus Jansen there from Canada, or no, United States now. Anyone, good morning, everybody. Hello, guys. How are you all doing today?
Very well. I'm very delighted to be here.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Great
to be here.
Morning, everybody. Looking forward to the show.
Gentlemen, we heard on that program, I think it was a staggering amount of money at the end there. Cyrus, you and I have talked a lot about this subject here with the amount of money being spent on this war and then the knock-on effect here in China. I think I'll start it off by saying that I'm starting to feel that all the eyes are on China coming up. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what we have to remember is that we're in a very long election cycle here in the United States, and unlike many other countries in the world, our election cycle is almost 2 years long. So I mean, both Republicans and Democrats have been ramping up already for months and months, and we are just going to get hammered now for the next 15 months or so, until this presidential election next November. And it's just going to be very wearing on the American public because we're just going to see so many political ads. And the big part of this is really China is becoming a central topic, for both Republicans and Democrats. And it's something that we have to remember, that the use of fear is very big in American politics. We can shift people's opinion by making you fear something. And right now, what both sides really want to do is make sure that the American public fears China, that the American public thinks that China is going to, somehow invade our country or threaten our democracy or overturn our elections, and that China is the biggest threat to America. This is, of course, the message that is being sent to Americans. And the problem is you turn on something like Fox News. I mean, it is just so far from reality and so far from the truth. But Americans don't have another outlet. They have nowhere else to go to see their information. Most Americans don't have a passport. Most Americans have never left the country. So their perceptions, quite frankly, to be very blunt, it's an incredible amount of propaganda inside the country. And most Americans have no idea that they're being fed that.
I think it's spilling over into Canada too. I'm not sure what Trudeau is smoking, but as I was listening to Alex Christopherou's talk about Justin Trudeau yesterday, it was quite interesting. Alex, your thoughts on this?
On what happened in the Canadian Parliament?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm at a loss for words, really. I really am. But it's, I was watching the live stream from Viva and Barnes yesterday, and Robert brought up a really interesting point about how they went after the truckers because they spotted a Nazi or Confederate flag. I don't even know what kind of flag it was. One flag. And they said that the truckers is a far-right movement, and then they went after their bank accounts and they shut them down. So what should they do to Parliament? Since they brought in an actual collaborator, a Nazi collaborator, maybe shut down their bank accounts? I don't know. I mean, it sounds only fair.
It's funny that you mentioned the bank accounts. My mom had a neighbor that donated $50 to the truckers, and 48 hours later, her bank account was seized just like that, instantly. And she called the bank up, and they said, well, it's we've been given a mandate under a terrorism act. She was read some law over the phone, and the lady's first response was, well, how did you get that information? I donated to an entity in the United States. How did that get up to Canada? Another interesting thing that Trudeau did say on this soundbite that I put, they're going after Putin sympathizers, or people that are, I would say, I don't even know how to say it. I mean, he's the type of guy that just will pretty much say anything on stage. But if you listen to that sound clip, he's basically going after anyone that in the media that doesn't go with the narrative here, and that's a bit scary.
Go after Putin sympathizers. Fine, they should go after Nazi sympathizers too. And they should start with the 328 or 348 people in Parliament in Canada. I mean, you can't. This was a spectacular own goal. I mean, it's spectacular. I mean, you couldn't have written a better scenario than what happened in Canada, as far as how ridiculous and how stupid and how hypocritical these leaders are. And now they're coming out and they're saying, and they are saying that they didn't know. They were ignorant. They had no idea. How were we to know that they were going to bring in a World War II SS volunteer? He volunteered as well. Collaborator. How would we know? That's what they're all saying now. When we know that Trudeau had a PR team, his media set the whole thing up. They contacted the guy. They sent a car for him. They brought him to the Parliament. I'm sure they fed him. They took care of him. I'm sure they briefed everybody in Parliament exactly how everything is going to go. Everyone got their script. Everyone knew when they were going to stand up. They knew. They knew exactly what was going on. They were just too dumb to connect the two together. That's their problem. They're too dumb to make the connection.
Alexander, thoughts on that?
I think this is an extraordinary affair, and Alex is absolutely right. It's backfired. I mean, the Polish government is now outraged. Israel is now outraged. Jewish groups around the world are outraged. I'm not sure, actually, that from Trudeau's perspective, this is actually such a bad thing, because I'm going to say straight away, I can't believe that the Canadian government didn't know who this man was and hadn't vetted it properly. Trudeau needs to have the support of Canadian Ukrainians, and I think he probably calculates that at the end of the day, whatever criticism there is around the world, the electoral benefits of this outweigh that. And one of the things that I have found really very disturbing, and it's not just in Canada, it's also in Europe also, is that there's now been a quiet, steady rehabilitation. And I have to say this, an increasing rehabilitation of the regime that existed in Germany, or at least some of its aspects, and some of the people who worked with it from that time, in Europe itself. And if you go to the media in Britain, for example, this particular episode in Canada, it's like there's been some kind of edict. You don't talk about it. You won't find much reference to it in the British media. So I think that Trudeau, his team, they knew who it was. They didn't particularly care. They went ahead. They calculate, as I said, that the advantages are greater than any embarrassments. Who cares what they think in Poland? Who cares very much what they think in Israel? At the end of the day, if it wins support amongst Canadian Ukrainians, they'll ride with it. And of course, what happened in the past is the past, and we no longer care. And the enemy today is the Russians, and they're the people we focus against. So I'm actually really very disturbed about this. I think it's more than just incompetence. I think there's something altogether more sinister involved here altogether.
Yeah, I'd like to add my thoughts on that too, because many of you know I was living in Canada for the last 5 years up until last year, and I was there when the Ottawa protests were happening, and I think what's interesting, and just to provide some context on how unpopular Justin Trudeau is inside of Canada. I mean, I think his approval rating is below 30%. Canada does have a system where there are multi-parties. So I think there's 5 different political parties in Canada. The issue is that you don't actually get to vote for the leader of that party. So, when you do have this right to vote, we're voting for our local member of parliament, who then goes on and, whoever is going to lead the Liberal Party, that's determined internally. So many Canadians are frustrated because even if you are a Liberal, many Liberals didn't like Justin Trudeau, but they had no opportunity to control, who was eventually going to lead that Liberal Party. It's always funny because we hear, there's no term limits in China and how bad that is. Well, there's no term limits in Canada either. And Justin Trudeau's been ruling for over a decade. Most Canadians are completely fed up with him. It was funny is that his wife divorced him earlier this year, maybe 2 months ago. And immediately everyone was on, line saying, it's not fair. Why does Sophie get to leave Justin and we still have to be stuck with him? It's like, she can get some relief, but we're still stuck with him. And I mean, he's been a disaster. I think he's an absolute, the worst prime minister in the history of Canada. He's been ruining that economy. I mean, it's, Canada is struggling huge right now. I was just in Vancouver about a month ago, and the rising costs, the inflation is through the roof. There's just so many basic Canadians that are really struggling to live inside that country, which is sad, because Canada has always been, one of the top 10 most livable places in the world. And, a city like Vancouver is a world-class city. It's arguably one of the top 10 cities in the world. But it's very difficult because for many people, they just simply can't afford to live there. And there's a lot of frustrations going in Canada. Many people who feel that they've been born and raised there. They're not a biggest priority as, for example, sending this money to Ukraine or getting more refugees in. And, you know, it's again, kind of similar tones to what we're seeing in the United States. I mean, when you played that clip from Rand Paul talking about, you know, we're sending $223 million a day to Ukraine. And there's a big frustration because, you know, and this is what's interesting here in the United States is we're starting to see a lot of political ads educating people on why we need to keep sending money to Ukraine. And so there's a whole thing like republicansforukraine.com. And it's the Republican Party is constantly putting out like, you know, hey, we're only spending 5% of our budget, but we are taking down Russia and we're taking down China. This is a good investment. And this is why Republicans are for Ukraine. And this is the message that is being sent out on television here. And so, but what's interesting is you'll see, you know, Michael Pompeo, this far right and as far right as you can possibly be on the political spectrum, you know, he's tweeting these things saying, you know, it's in our best interest that we support Ukraine and defeat Russia. And even the staunchest Republican followers are pushing back to him on Twitter. You go to that tweet and every single comment is no, absolutely not. No more money, no more money. Please focus on America, focus on us. No more. Enough's enough. And it's interesting how this is the big struggle that the Republican Party is having right now, so much that they're like, okay, well, now let's start to put out some TV ads that we can, you know, start preaching our message a little bit more hardcore so that people can really understand what we're trying to do here. So that's kind of the update here from North America. Both US and Canada struggling tremendously, inflation through the roof. People are, you know, finding it very difficult.
Let's cue that 30-second commercial so everyone knows what you're talking about. Here we go.
Sure.
When America arms Ukraine, we get a lot for a little. Putin is an enemy of America. We've used 5% of our defense budget to arm Ukraine, and with it, they've destroyed 50% of Putin's army. We've done all this by sending weapons from storage, not our troops. The more Ukraine weakens Russia, the more it also weakens Russia's closest ally, China. America needs to stand strong against our enemies. That's why Republicans in Congress must continue to support Ukraine.
GOPforukraine.com. Sorry, I got the website wrong.
I did a quick calculation. I came up with a number of $28 million per hour that this war is costing. And that's, I would say, probably lowballing it.
It's
you say costing, but for them it's making.
Yeah.
So always keep that in mind.
True,
You say
yeah.
it's costing, but for them, they're making the money. They want that 24 billion. They want that 300 billion in frozen assets. They just can't figure out how to get that money without alienating other investors and people who have put money in the collective West. They don't want them to pull out their money, but they want that 300 billion as well. They want that 24 billion.
Yeah.
Trudeau talked about 9 billion during the Jets Patriots game the other day. I saw that the Jets now have a Ukraine flag in the back of their helmet. The New York Jets, instead of like a U.S. flag, it's a Ukraine flag.
Really?
But that's product placement.
Right.
It's the military-industrial complex placing an advertisement for war, for their business. They want the money, and they understand that the collapse of the Zelensky regime is coming, and they want to get their hands on all of the billions that is floating around there, because for the last 10, 15 years, they've been making a ton of money from Ukraine. And it was only when Putin launched the SMO that he exposed their game.
Let's dig into that number. That's almost close to what BlackRock and Citibank are saying that it's going to cost to rebuild the Ukraine. They're coming in at a figure of about 400 billion plus or minus. So that's an interesting figure.
Easily. I mean, Ukraine's been absolutely wrecked. I mean, it's sad what's happened to the country. I mean, but even if it stops today, I mean, they're looking at 20, 30 years of rebuilding, you know, $400 or $500 billion to do that. I mean, it's a disaster. So, I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Eve Smith at Naked Capitalism has written a good piece about this, about the fact that all of these plans to reconstruct Ukraine are absolutely fictional. It can't be done. even with the $400 billion that is being talked about. But can I just say, of course, the whole point about that commercial, about it only costing 5% of the budget, of the defense budget, all the figures that we've been hearing about, $117 billion of what it's costing to continue this war, all of this is completely wrong. It is only a very small fraction of what the overall cost of the war is to the United States, to Europe, to the American people, to people in Europe, to people around the world. Because, of course, that doesn't factor in the much bigger economic consequences of the war, which are huge. The disruption of trade patterns, the problems in the oil markets, the problems with gas in Europe. And, of course, I am just today received some indications of what my fuel bills in London are going to be looking like going forward. The effective implosion of the industrial structure in Germany. These are enormous costs. This is by far the single most expensive war the United States has waged, even if it is waging it only by proxy since the Second World War. And so that commercial that we saw is completely misleading. It gives the impression that, we're just giving a couple of $100 billion. That's all. And we're achieving all of these tremendous outcomes. We've degraded the Russian army by 50%. The reality that Americans are feeling every day in their household budgets, when they go to the gas stations, when they buy food at Walmart, those are the realities which are completely different.
I want to share now something that I actually have an invested interest in. I play the derivative markets. I've been doing it for 20 years. I want to show you guys a slide here. And this is something that I think everybody should keep an eye on. This is the closing price on, I guess it was yesterday or pre-market, we'll say, of natural gas. This is Henry Hub. This is something, I guess, if you wanted to get into natural gas, this is something that you can buy. And there's plenty of ETFs for this, but this gives you an indicator of the natural gas market. And you can look back in 2022 and 2023 there, it peaked out at around $10. And that's when the prices started to skyrocket. Now it's been pretty flat for the last couple of months, but there's something that we need to pay attention here. Ukrainian gas transmission network consists of more than 37,000 kilometers of pipelines with 12 entry points from Russia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and 7 main exits. Now, here's the map. Let's have a look quickly at the map here. And we're showing the inflows, most of it coming through the Ukraine and most of it coming through Belarus into, Moldova, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, and then into the European market. Now, this is what I came across just recently, though. Now, this is the over-the-counter shares of the EU gas derivatives. They've surged 25%. Basically, what that means is somebody is buying some serious insurance. These derivatives, and you calculate the size of this natural gas market. This natural gas market is in the trillions of dollars here. Like, we are talking mega bucks here. And when you're seeing a 25% surge in insurance or derivatives, that means somebody is placing a serious bet. And I came up with a conclusion. It's probably built on this article here, where Russia-China trade is on track for a record. And this is an indicator as well that Gazprom delivers its first LNG cargo to China via the Atlantic. I think there is going to be a big play here on the natural gas market. There's going to be a squeeze. And this is where I think, I think there's going to be another war on the financial markets, especially as Alexander was saying, they're setting their customers up for quite a big surprise. But I don't think that demand that's going to be needed in Europe is going to be, the Americans, I don't think, are going to be able to supply it, especially at an affordable price. I think we're going to be in for some serious shocks here, especially when a 25% increase in derivatives. That is massive. Like, we are talking trillions of dollars to secure those types of position, and that is some big moves in the market.
That's very interesting. Absolutely, and I think I'm sure you're absolutely right. I'm sure that is what is coming, and of course, that is going to affect Europe. It's going to affect Germany very badly. It's going to affect Britain because, of course, we used to claim we didn't buy gas from Russia, and it turned out that wasn't true, by the way. And of course, we don't have reserves of natural gas the way the Germans, at least, they do have systems created by the Russians, by the way, in Germany, big gas storage facilities. We don't have anything like that in Britain. So all kinds of countries are going to become increasingly vulnerable. And all of this is an overspill of the war. And you're talking about gas. You see the absolutely critical importance again of China. And there's been this narrative that we've seen much of over the past year about the Chinese economy being at a standstill, that China's model is somehow falling apart, that things are not looking good in China. That's the narrative is still there, but the realities are starting to shift. We're starting to see the Chinese economy regain momentum. And I think there were specific reasons why it slowed. And it only slowed. I mean, we're in recession in Europe, but in China, there was only a certain slowing. We're going to start to see that accelerate, and it's going to start pulling in gas. It's going to start pulling in oil. And already people are talking about, in the West, oil at $150 a barrel, which is going to be very difficult for many people coming on top of the cost of living issues that existed before. And there's no sign that anybody in Europe is ready for this. And I don't get the sense that the United States, they aren't much ready for it either.
I don't think anyone's prepared at all. When you're seeing that type of a position, let me give you an example. The best example I can give you would have been February of 2018 when the derivatives market was on the S&P. That pretty much emptied the bank accounts of about 11 major banks. So when you're seeing something like this in natural gas, a shock to the system, I don't know if you guys ever remember when oil went negative. Do you remember that?
I do.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're seeing the opposite here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see oil 200, 220 a barrel coming up in the next 3 or 4 months. I mean, the Russians are laughing, all the way to the bank on that one. But the interesting part is when you start to see China that is stockpiling this stuff. I mean, in big quantities, and that's taking that major supplier out of the market. I cannot believe that people, are acknowledging it. And that's the thing is, I just keep an eye on this one here, guys. I believe the symbol's UNG on that, but the natural gas market, I'll come up with the exact quote, but if that thing gets anywhere close to $4 or $5 per share, that means all hell's breaking loose.
All right. No, that's a good insight, Alex. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the Chinese economic struggles, if you will, and the slowdown. I mean, I think there's definitely some slowdown in the Chinese economy, but I think what we're seeing is more of a transition. For example, I remember living in China back in the days of, I first went to China in 2007. And the big thing that drives China's economy for many years has been real estate, right? Real estate makes up a large percentage of the GDP. And I was part of that cycle where, for example, many people were speculating, buying apartments, buying houses, seeing rapid appreciation in just a few short years. And it was a very lucrative time, to be buying and flipping houses in China. And of course, I think that market has just matured. And so, for example, you're not going to China right now trying to, invest in real estate, or, if you're not speculating on that. So I think it's more of a shift of into its next phase, and it's a maturing of the market in China. And it's certainly one where, real estate is not going to be such a big factor. But what we need to look at is we need to look at certain industries within China that are actually shifting to be more of a priority. And as we know, in China, if the government says, okay, for example, artificial intelligence, this is an important field that we really want to help, develop. And so there's going to be tax advantages. You know, if you go to this city in China, we're going to give you tax advantages to open up an AI company and really help out in that research. So there's always opportunities, you know, in any market. You know, obviously, people, you know, even if we look at the stock market, right? If it goes up or down, people can make money. There's always opportunities no matter what's happening. But there's certain industries. Certainly, the electric vehicle industry is booming in China. China contains most of the technologies for all kinds of battery technology. I mean, they're absolutely dominant. And even a couple months ago, I remember the New York Times wrote an amazing piece that just said, you know, whoever controls the future of EV batteries really controls the future technology of the world. And right now, no one can compete with China. China is so far ahead. And so it was a very objective piece from the New York Times that actually just spelled it out very clearly how advanced China is and how, you know, again, the big thing is, you know, we're trying to see these EV cars debut in America, but the price point is still very high. So they're like, how do we get a price point where that car is, say, you know, below $30,000? You know, you can't do it without Chinese technology. You know, it's the only way possible. And so, you know, you look at solar power, EVs, you know, batteries, artificial intelligence. There's a lot of opportunities in these sectors that are really booming and that are going to be driving China's future economy.
Can I very quickly cut in to say that, you know, I've been in contact with people in Germany recently. Alex was recently in Russia, and he was very struck by the number of Chinese cars here. The Germans are very spooked by this rise in the Chinese car industry.
Right.
It suddenly the penny has dropped that they have a massive and extremely well organized competitor there. And the Chinese cars are not only just extremely good, but that they're more modern and that they're more adapted, if you like, to today's world than German cars are. So this has been, on top of everything else, all the energy issues that we've been talking about, all the problems of incentives and investment in Germany, that they're now really shaking and worrying about what's going to happen with the German car industry. And I've been sent all sorts of programs by some of my friends about this Chinese car maker, Hongqi. I can't pronounce it properly, but apparently it's the Chinese equivalent of Mercedes. It's the sort of top car brand. And I must admit, they do look very, very impressive.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Alexander. And also, Alex, when I remember watching that report when you were in Russia talking about it. But Europe does not want these cars, period, under any circumstances. They do not want these cars on cargo ships coming over. They don't want them on rail links coming over. This is the Motor City of China here. We're in Chongqing. And there's NIO, there's Avatar, there's Geely. There's some there's BYD manufacturing plants here. We just had an auto show. I spoke with a guy that worked for Volkswagen, 80,000 employees in China. You know, I won't tell you what he said, but I can tell you for a fact that the Europeans, they don't want these cars here. The lobbyists in the United States, they don't want the electric cars. They're putting out all types of commercials, you know, how these cars can't replicate the American muscle. I mean, I understand all that from a cosmetic standpoint, but what I've seen here in the last 2 years, I've seen entire taxi companies replace their fleet of taxis, some 20, 30, 40, 50,000 cars in a blink of an eye. You would see maybe 1 in 10 cars have a green license plate, which indicates new energy vehicle. Next thing you know, it's maybe 7 in 10 cars here now. The push is here. The government's, behind it. But yeah, these guys want to work together. They want to work with Europeans on this technology. Here's the different thing, and I think that Cyrus kind of really nailed it as well, is that these Chinese companies are all working together. It's not like in competition with each other. You know, Huawei is in the inside of some of these cars. You know, the satellite system is Baidu's satellite system, which has more precision than the Americans' GPS system. I mean, a lot of these cars do impact and change people's lives. It's not just a car on wheels. I was talking to an Austrian lady, and she said basically it's a mobile phone on wheels. Mm-hmm. And she nailed it right on that as well. So these cars are changing people's lives. There's charging stations, I mean, everywhere. And there's incentives. Drive your car to the shopping mall, get free parking and free charging. Done.
Right.
So it's these collaborations of companies coming together, and the Europeans don't want it. And they're going to do every single thing that they can do to stop it. You're going to see hit pieces on these car companies. You're going to see, of course, the same old, Chinese are making a cheap brand. I mean, there are cheap cars here. You can buy a Wuling brand car, which looks like a smart car, for about $4,000, brand new. So yeah, it's here. Alex, I was going to ask you, I mean, did you get to drive in one of the cars when you were in Russia?
Yeah, I would say 50% of all the taxi services are these cars, are the Chinese cars. That was my first experience, actually being inside one of the Chinese cars, and it happened fast. 4 years ago, when I was in Moscow, there were no Chinese cars.
Right.
It was all German cars. A lot of I remember a lot of Hyundais and Kias. This time around, 50% of all the cars were the Chinese cars, and I was interacting with some of the drivers, and I would ask them in the basic Russia that I speak. I'm like, what do you think of the car? And they're like, it's great, no problem, it's all good, very comfortable inside, very modern. I mean, they blew it. Europe blew it. Germany destroyed itself. And the slide that you put up, Alex, the interesting part about it is that the oil and the gas, I think it was the chart with the oil that it was going through the Arctic.
Yeah, that's right.
I believe that was the route that they're using from that slide that you put up. Yeah, LNG cargo via the Arctic. If you look at the countries that got into BRICS, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, China, Eurasia, Russia. You look at what's happening, you can see that you're seeing a checkmate move. We're also looking at geography and the countries that are aligning and working together. You can see they're going to be controlling the way things move. It's not only about selling the items, but they're going to be controlling the way things are moving. And Europe really made a big mistake, because long ago, the dream was from Shanghai to Lisbon.
Right.
Wasn't that what it was all about? Not anymore. Now it's up to St. Petersburg. Yeah. That's where it stops. And that's where we get the big Iron Curtain. And that's why Ursula, in her State of the Union address for the EU, she basically declared war against Chinese EV makers.
Yeah, I want to add an interesting insight to this EV industry, because one of the things that we'll often hear is that Tesla, dominates in China, and that Tesla, it's the biggest EV company in the world. It's so much successful. So the interesting thing about China is you actually have to go back to around the turn of the millennial, where China was very strategic in how they were, wanting to compete in this industry. Right around 2000, EV was still very, very fresh, very new. Many people didn't think it could ever really work. And so, the Chinese government actually was very systematic in how they calculated this. What they said is they looked at, for example, the traditional automobile industry, and it's like, well, look at like Germany and Japan, and it's really hard for us to compete with this. But we see an opportunity in the market if we go really shift to EV. But one of the smartest things that China ever did is they actually invited Tesla to come in and be part of the Chinese EV ecosystem. And so much to the point where now 50% of the Teslas that are made in the world are coming from the Shanghai Gigafactory. So while it's important to, while we can certainly say that Tesla is an amazing car, it's an amazing company, they have some amazing technology, but by inviting in, the number one EV company into China, and then integrating that into the Chinese EV ecosystem, they've now made it to where Tesla can't leave China, right? It's not like Tesla can leave China and go somewhere else. Where's the other gigafactory? I mean, sure, we said that they potentially are going to open another gigafactory in India. I actually just made a video about, the difficulties in India and why it's so hard to manufacture there, and why China has such a strategic advantage. Even if, new factories are opened in India, a lot of people are talking about this iPhone production, and, oh man, all of the iPhones are going to ship from India. realistically, maybe 10 to 15% at most will go there. Okay, so 15% of iPhones are made in India. Where's the other 85% made? Still made in China. Still a massive part of your cycle there that you need is in China. And the interesting thing is that by inviting in Tesla into Shanghai and having Tesla really establish their roots in China, now a lot of Chinese companies were able to learn from them, and they were able to really be pushed to accelerate much faster. And it's really no different than what we're seeing with, for example, Huawei and how they recently launched this new Mate 60 phone. China has been able to develop these new 7-nanometer chips. When the United States sanctions China or tries to put China into a corner, it actually backfires, because what it does is it enables Chinese companies to think, your back's against the wall. You're going to have to survive. You're going to have to think of a solution. And I think what's interesting is, if we had never sanctioned these Chinese companies, the Chinese domestic microchip market probably would have never developed, because if we never sanctioned them, they would have said, hey, US has the chips. We're just going to buy them. We can just buy the chips. We don't need to develop them domestically. But obviously, if there's a weakness there, because the US can say, hey, we're not going to sell to you anymore. Well, if you're going to cut us off, then we're going to have to develop our own chips. And so, again, I think that's a really important piece I just wanted to add in there, that people need a little bit more nuance and understanding. Tesla is amazing, but Tesla is also very, very reliant and very dependent on China for the labor force, for that ability. Again, almost 50% of all Teslas are coming from that Shanghai Gigafactory, and it's a vital cog in the Tesla wheel that needs to keep going. And again, that's a very smart move from China's government that decided to embrace the best EV maker. And as a result, it is pushing all of these EV companies to really get better much, much faster than anybody can anticipate. And it's truly incredible, what's really going on in the EV industry and how China's leading it.
I just want to add, have a look at the screen here now. I've been invited down to see this company here in a couple of weeks, and they're going after the housing market in North America. These are prefabricated models that ship in a 40-foot container. Now, these are state-of-the-art, and they call these off-grid homes. And what they mean by that is, it's interesting, Cyrus, in the business model here, they're encouraging Americans, get this, to live outside of the city limits, where there's no municipal taxing. These homes come with a kit that help you go into the ground and get into the main water line. That's the first one. The second one is the solar energy in that, where these homes will be able to be self-efficient. And they also promote for communication Starlink. So they're saying that this is a fully, I would say, capsule home, which comes with its own foundation. They pack it with its own foundation. And they say half the price of a Tesla. And so this is the market that the Chinese are going after. They say that, when I go down to the factory, I spoke to the guy that runs the factory there. He says, yeah, all the TV screens, everything comes in. Just basically, it's turnkey. As soon as we offload it off the 40-foot container, you plug it into the water lines, and you're pretty much on the outside. Because you see a lot of these people nowadays going off the grids, building these log cabins. Well, here are the Chinese coming in with these homes at 30, 35,000, 40,000 for home, which I think is very interesting for them to go after that market.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, that's a really popular trend right now. There's a lot of people are wanting to go off grid. Actually, you can search on YouTube. There's actually some very popular channels just saying, look, make some money, get out of the rat race, get off grid, move away from the government as fast as you can. And I mean, that'll appeal to a lot of Americans that are wanting to do that. It's a great, very cool. I mean, that looks amazing.
It looks like, I mean, I have to say, it does look like something that raises questions about the political and social atmosphere in the United States, that people apparently don't want to live in cities anymore, and they don't want to be they don't want to be joined up to the system, the grid system and all of that, which, I mean, what one can see is attractive for individuals, but for the social fabric of a country, it perhaps doesn't tell a very good story, or so it seems to me. Can I just come back to what you were saying about the fact that the Europeans and the Americans don't want these Chinese cars to come?
Mhm.
That was exactly the point that Ursula von der Leyen was making in that clip that you showed at the beginning. I mean, she's basically talking about protection. In other words, protecting European industries from Chinese competition. She didn't quite set it out like that. And she comes along with all these horrible comments about, the Chinese, they've cheated, they've done all of these things to us, and we've got to protect ourselves from them. What that is going to do, we have, ample history about this now, going all the way back to the 19th century. If a country adopts protectionist policies in order to protect growing, dynamic, modern industries that are evolving and rapidly increasing and developing, becoming more sophisticated, as happened in the United States, for example, in the 19th century, or as it was happening in Germany at around the same time, then actually protectionism can make some sense. But if you are doing it in order to preserve industries that are in trouble, if you're trying to do it, in other words, to prop up industries, then what you are going to ensure is ossification and further decline. You mentioned the person who said that, this car is a mobile phone on wheels, it's enormously advanced. You're just ensuring that people in Europe and in North America don't have access to that, and that the Chinese, who have a far bigger market now, and who also, by the way, have access to global markets around the world, they're going to the gap between them and us is going to grow. Now, what I'm saying is it isn't controversial. It is well established, not just economics, but it's also well established economic history as well.
Right.
Well, I mean, the interesting point that Alex was saying, that when he was in Russia, the shift to Chinese cars is one move that he recognized. But I think you also have to take into consideration that the Bank of China was there 18 months ago, opening up new branches right in the middle of this blocking of SWIFT, and they were there. So if it's automobiles, it must be spilling over into other sectors. I mean, I think Russia has actually done its move. It's prepared itself. It's insulated itself. And of course, sure, there's going to be industries that were impacted, but when you think about it, they're pretty much long what the world needs. I mean, plenty of trees to export. The agriculture is doing well, and they made a shift. They said, hey, okay, if these guys don't want to sell cars to us anymore, if McDonald's wants to leave the country. I mean, did you feel, Alex, when you were in Russia there, that there was, quite a shift in business? Were people missing certain companies that they wish didn't leave, or was it just kind of business as usual?
No, I think it was business as usual. I mean, for me, as someone coming from Europe, I needed a couple of days to get set up. I mean, I'll tell you guys, it wasn't easy. It wasn't hard, but it wasn't, I just get off the plane and I go to my hotel and everything is working. You need a couple of days to adjust, because you are, in a way, entering a new system. But once you get set up, once you get your mobile set up, your internet, the banking, the Mir card, all these things, once you get it set up, I mean, you're good to go. And you don't feel like you're missing anything, like anything at all. I mean, I was doing videos from the shopping malls, and everything was full. They had everything that you could possibly expect in a shopping mall, from the stores, the shops. The only thing that I realized was that, all of the investment that Europe and the US made in Russia, they destroyed it within a year. Instead of Starbucks, you had Stars. Instead of McDonald's, you had the Vkusna Tochka. You had all the money that they poured into Russia to develop the market and to build the market, they completely destroyed it. And you walk around, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and you're like, for what? Why did they do this to themselves? Every other car is a Chinese car now. It didn't have to be that way. Russia adapted, and they're fine. And the market is lost now forever for the West. I mean, I think some companies will be able to get back into the market. I think a lot of companies haven't left, and they found creative workarounds to remain in Russia, or at least to keep their presence on hold. But a lot of companies just gave up everything for Zelensky. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, when you look at these are companies that were setting up in the, when the fall of the Soviet Union, they were in there. There was companies just, jumping to get into that market, spending billions of dollars to get into it, whether it's accounting firms all the way to banking firms to hedge funds to, restaurant corporations, shopping malls. And then in a blink of an eye, they're gone overnight.
I mean, Visa, just an example, Visa, MasterCard, they're not in Russia. They have the domestic Visa, MasterCard system, but it's only for domestic markets. So if you have a Visa from a bank in Russia, I don't even think they're issuing Visa, but if you have like a legacy Visa bank, Visa card from a bank in Russia, you can't pay for items if you're outside of Russia with that Visa. So they shifted to the Mir card. Once you get the Mir card set up, there's no difference, zero difference. That's what I'm saying. It's they handed over the market to the Russians, to the Chinese, to other entrepreneurs, to other countries that moved in. They just handed it right over. You go to Starbucks, it's the same exact thing. Same thing. But they gave up all their infrastructure, all the employees, all the locations. They just handed it right over. And it works in exactly the same way, the same amount of people. They're busy just like it was when it was Starbucks. I mean, there's no real difference, except that you don't have to pay the franchise fee to the guys back in Seattle. That's I guess the difference. Yeah,
and
they get to keep the 9 or 10%.
The trust is broken forever. That's one thing that will never come back from these shops that have just walked away, turned their back on this market. I mean, that is where you kind of wonder, there is no way back. And in a way, it's kind of protecting Russia for the future because they've seen how evil that these banking systems can be. I mean, look at all the money just drained, gone. You're part of SWIFT. Okay, we'll seize this account. We'll take that yacht. We saw it in the south of France. I have some friends in the south of France, and they just went after all of these, homes in the hills there. They just took them lock, stock, and barrel, without anything, without a court order. They just went in and just said, okay, Russian owned, boom, gone. Yachts, broad daylight. And that's the thing is, will the Russians ever trust, Western banking system ever again? I think that relationship is game over. And we're talking a serious chunk of the globe here. And all these other little countries have pretty much looked at it and said, okay, I don't want that to happen to us too. Let's get the hell out of here. Let's sign on to the Belt Road. Let's get on with the BRICS program. I think this globe has changed forever financially. And I still don't think that the North American markets they've done a lot of window dressing here with, having inflated budgets here. I still don't think the ball is dropped, and I still think we're going to see some dark times ahead for the fallout when this really, really hits.
I agree with that completely. I would add that there is also a fundamental difference, and this is something I'm starting to hear more and more about, from the way in which the Chinese work in Russia, from the way in which the Western companies who went into Russia work there, which is the Western companies basically went to Russia very much seeing it as an opportunity to make money. It was a quick opportunity to make money. It was a market, in other words. Whereas the Chinese are much more interested in collaborative programs and establishing long-term relationships, which actually strengthen the domestic economy. So just to give one example, just one amongst many, because we were talking about cars, after all this crisis happened, one of the big car companies, manufacturing companies near Moscow, Western ones, pulled out. The factory was mothballed. The Russians wanted to reopen it. They reopened it under the Moscovich brand. They found a Chinese collaborator company that will help, provided them with a car to make. The machine tools came from China very quickly. But the point is that they're going to be able to develop from that factory and from that collaboration cars that are specifically for the Russian market. So there's going to be a collaborative program to actually develop cars in Russia in a way that never really happened with the West. So already you see differences, and I suspect that those differences will grow. Same will happen with high-speed trains. The same thing will happen with mobile phones, with the whole world of electronics. I was reading again a long piece. This is again from a Russian source about the Russian government now has a major program about how to develop electronics and chips in Russia, develop chip production. But they say, look, we're going to go up to a certain level. There's no point in going beyond that, 28, whatever it is. We're not going to try and reach 7 because the Chinese have already got there. So we're going to take those chips from them, but we're going to work with the Chinese because there is now, before long, going to be a technology beyond chips. And there's a lot of discussion about what this was, which is technically didn't make much sense to me because I'm not a technical person. But you could already see the kind of forward planning, and the scientists are involved, the engineers are involved, the Chinese are also involved, the Russians are involved, the kind of thing that never happened in terms of industrial collaborations with the West. And that's Russia. And you see the same happen in country after country. The only way, in my opinion, and I say this frankly, India could start seriously competing with China as a manufacturing economy is if the Chinese actually went to India and showed them how to do it and actually organized it for them there. Because, I mean, I say that, I'm not unsympathetic to India at all, but the economic ecostructure there is profoundly different. And if you're going to talk about manufacturing and high technology manufacturing, the reality is that despite all the talk about Indian growth, the gap between India and China is actually growing. It's not shrinking, contrary to what many people think.
I just want to add to that is that China's trading partner, number one trading partner with 120 countries, directly, 1-to-1. 1/3 or 33 to 35% of the exports coming out of China are from American companies. So that figure in itself is quite surprising. And I think companies like Apple here are very careful to not really get involved with the geopolitical stuff here with their technology, because almost 50% of the handset sales for Apple's revenue come from China alone. And here's a country that I think could be in crossfires with you and would still ship to you. It's quite crazy. And during the pandemic, this company was just going full tilt. So, it is quite interesting, Alexander, that you mentioned India. I think the Chinese are most willing to get them on board with this Belt and Road. And if that really happens, then that's really going to shake up global trade for sure.
Well, it will be game over. It's what the Americans are worried about. And it's why we suddenly see an eruption of articles in the media here in the West. Financial Times talking about the West's Modi problem.
Right.
That I think they were very, very shocked that India went along with all those Chinese proposals at the BRICS summit. And they were very shocked about what happened at the G20 summit as well. So they were very unhappy with all of that. And I got a very interesting email from someone. I'm not going to say who, but it was about the diamonds, the new sanctions on diamonds. And it's been suggested it isn't really about Russia at all. It's actually specifically more directed at India and against Modi specifically, because apparently a lot of the cutting and polishing of diamonds actually happens in the leading city in his home state, in his own particular electoral and political backyard. So the Americans, the West seems to be worried that this attempt to draw India into their orbit, and by the way, the Financial Times actually used that expression, drawing India into the West's orbit, the US's orbit, which is an extraordinary thing to say about a country like India, and which the Indians would not be happy to hear, by the way. They don't want to be anybody's satellite or in anybody's orbit. But anyway, the Americans are very dismayed that that is not happening in the way that they expected. And they're now taking these different actions against India. And, you know, the events in Canada, the events with the diamond sanctions, apparently, and these articles, these hit pieces on Prime Minister Modi, which are now appearing. I think it will happen. I think that India and China have lots of issues. There's lots of strong feelings, especially in India. But I think eventually it will all be sorted out.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, because what's interesting is that the United States, I think, looks at India as somebody that they could hopefully, court and hopefully, persuade them to, essentially bring down BRICS. That's what the United States wants to do. That's why the United States invited Modi to, for an official state visit earlier this year. And I think what's interesting with India is that they are really playing their cards very smartly, as they should. And I think that's what we're seeing around the world now is, again, we've shifted from this unipolar world to a multipolar world. And I don't think any country really wants to be, just relegated to dealing with one country, whether that's China or the United States. I mean, if you're India, you would certainly want to have a good relationship with both the US and China. And so I think there's a little bit of managing expectations. The United States wants to, they expect India to follow order and say, hey, look, you're a democracy, we're a democracy, us democracies need to stick together. We want you to basically bring down BRICS or be that thorn in the BRICS unit. Whereas with China, with India, that really doesn't make any sense for India. They have had this policy of non-alignment for decades, really since they established their independence in 1947, where they don't want to align with any particular entity or somebody completely. They want to have that flexibility and that freedom to move about. And that's why you see India, in this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with China on a security deal. Obviously why they're a founding member of BRICS. And it's this, and they've had, in the recent BRICS summit in Johannesburg, Modi and Xi Jinping met and said, we need to resolve these border conflicts. Basically it doesn't benefit either of us to have these border clashes. Let's resolve this. Let's finally get this to be water under the bridge. And I think I really like the insight, Alexander, that you shared, that I think India potentially has it has the potential, it can be a manufacturing source of manufacturing, but it really does need China to, come in and lead the way and really show that. But the big problem is just the infrastructure. That's really where China is just so far ahead. And I had a chance to visit China earlier this June. I went to a textile factory in a city called Jiangyin, which is near Wuxi. It is really where all of the textiles industry is in China. But what's incredible is, as I'm walking down the side of the road, I'm just seeing, massive semi-truck after semi-truck after semi-truck that is just piled in with cotton. I mean, it's just, 20, 30, 40 semi-trucks filled with cotton. And what the factory owners told me, it said, everything that you need to produce any textile is within 20 miles right? If you need, the cotton is sourced here, the buttons, the zippers, the dies, every single step in that manufacturing process is all within one area. And so they have incredible leverage, to be building all of these different textiles. Anything that you can imagine, they can produce in that area. And all of China's textile, the major companies are all within that area. And actually, that entire city, I think one of the biggest textile firm in China, they basically, have developed the entire city. It's actually incredible. It's like a water town. It's very similar to like a Venice, and they have these big squares, and they've built up this entire new city, and that's all funded from the textile industry. And so that is really, it's quite incredible when you just go behind the scenes and kind of really look into that and see, how. That's China's competitive advantage. In the West, we always have this false sense of, it's because of cheap labor. Labor's not cheap in China. From 2000 until 2023, labor has gone up 7 times. I mean, it's increased substantially in China. So it's not a cheap place to manufacture, but it's because of the logistics and how they've managed to build out the ecosystem. That's the competitive advantage that is miles, years, 20, 30 years ahead of India. India has trouble with electricity. They generate 1/4 the amount of electricity that China does, and yet their population is the same. So even in the most advanced cities in India, power outages happen all the time. So how can you manage a successful factory if you're dealing with power outages? It's the simple logistics that really are plaguing India at the moment, and that really need a lot more time to develop. So the potential's there. I think it really does. For India, why wouldn't you want to establish a better relationship with China, who has been the world's factory for the past 4 decades and has the blueprint on how you develop and how you do this?
Interesting. I want to bring up a point that I was talking with Brian Berletic yesterday, and I'd like to ask Alex this. With all this new artillery that the Ukrainians are bringing into the country, I asked him, why hasn't Russia taken out the rail lines? Why hasn't Russia gone after the rail lines right at the border? And the reason why I asked this is because I got an email from a guy that worked for a company. He worked for a weighing in motion system for the rail tracks. He sent me an email, quite a long email, explaining to me that they could, even from satellites, detect an unusual weight limit on rail cars. And especially when he was saying that the rail cars that come from Europe have to actually go through a switch before they get onto the tracks in the Ukraine, because I guess the diameter of the wheels is maybe bigger or something like that. And he's saying as soon as that weight load comes on, they could identify it from, satellites detecting it, knowing that damn well ain't, 100 passengers. That is tanks or something. And they should be able to blow that out of the sky. Is it just Russia being polite? I don't know. Thoughts on that, guys?
Well, can I just explain it briefly? Russian train lines are wider than European ones. In Europe and the United States, we have standard gauge, and Russia has a slightly wider gauge. And I've actually seen it done. You see trains basically being lifted, the bogies changed, and then put down from one to the other. So that is how it's done. I think the Russians haven't done it for one straightforward and very, very simple reason. And that is that if they started attacking trains like that so close to the borders with NATO, it might open up possibilities for escalating the war. And they don't want to escalate the war. They want to keep the war contained in Ukraine, because as far as they're concerned, the war is going their way. They are taking more losses as a result, but they made the cold-blooded calculation. They can absorb them. They do not want a NATO-Russia war, because that would be a catastrophe. So they don't want to start, sending missiles where these trains switch places, because if a missile were to land in Poland or Romania, and people there were to be killed, and there was to be a disaster, well, the consequences of that would be very unpredictable. Now, How long the Russians can continue to act with that level of restraint is, of course, another question, because there are an awful lot of people in Russia who are asking exactly the same questions as your correspondent is asking. I mean, Putin gets criticized continuously for the sense of restraint that he shows in the way in which Russia is conducting the war. But for the moment, at least, this decision is holding. The Russians have made it clear that, well, Putin has said that they don't want to be provoked into overreactions. They don't want to escalate the war. The war is going their way, and they don't have any need, therefore, to act in that kind of way.
I mean, with these budgets, though, it's not just military aid, but I mean, what is all this money going to in this country? Where is it all going? I mean, $650 million from Canada is a lot of money for Canadians. I mean, there's only 35 million of us, and $650 million. I mean, any ideas, gentlemen? Alex, any idea?
Where's it going? No one knows, and they don't want to audit either. That's the interesting part. No one wants to figure out where all of this money is going. A lot of it is being lost. A lot of it is going to the military-industrial complex. They're signing contracts and deals to produce weapons. Sometimes they even say they're going to produce those weapons inside of Ukraine. They're going to build big factories inside of Ukraine. But a lot of the money is just, contracts with the MIC, and these contracts are for the MIC to build weapons. They use the excuse of the conflict in Ukraine. It's going to be a long war, so we need to prepare ourselves to build X amount of tanks or X amount of ammo in the next 5 years. And if Project Ukraine collapses, it's okay. We still have these contracts. We have the money budgeted, and we can produce this stuff somewhere else. I mean, that's what a lot of it is. I mean, think about it this way: it's the UK MIC company. What is it? BAS, Alexander?
Yeah,
BAS. Okay, so they traveled to Kiev. They said they're gonna build a factory in Kiev. They're going to make weapons in Kiev. So the money comes from the UK or the US. They say we're going to give $500 million to Ukraine. BAS gets a $400 million or $300 million contract to build a factory in Ukraine, and that money that's coming from the UK goes to Zelensky. Zelensky pays BAS, and that's how the money goes in it just goes in a circle.
Yeah.
Just goes in a circle.
Yeah,
that's it. And also a lot of the weapons, let's not forget, a lot of the weapons are hitting the black market.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are making a lot of money from this stuff. A lot of NATO generals, a lot of Ukraine generals. When this conflict ends, there are going to be a lot of multi-millionaires and billionaires being made. A whole lot. There's going to be a lot of people that made a lot of money just from weapons sales. But that's the game. That's the game that's being played, and that's why they want that $24 billion. They want that $24 billion really, really bad. We're talking about a lot of money for a lot of people.
Where are these weapons going to end up?
We've been here before. We've been here with Afghanistan, with South Vietnam. A lot of the weapons will end up in Russia when they're captured. A lot of the weapons will end up on the international black market, as they invariably do. A lot of weapons will end up in warehouses. And of course, an awful lot of the weapons which are being paid for will never be delivered. And going back to what Alex was saying, I mean, I take an even more cynical view. I think an awful lot of the money is going straight. It probably will never reach Ukraine. More likely, it's going to end up in all kinds of offshore accounts in all sorts of places. Now, again, we have a large Afghan community here in London, and I've been in touch with some of the people there. And when you tell them how much money went into Afghanistan during the 20 years that the United States was there, they're incredulous because they say, we never saw any of it. We
Right.
never saw, the factories, the roads, the railways, the airports, those kind of things. They never appeared because it went straight in and it went straight out again. I'm going to make a guess. I'm going to suggest that some of that money that the Canadians are giving is going to go back to Canada. A lot of it is going to go into all sorts of interesting islands in the Caribbean and around the British Isles, which are the offshore tax havens. And a lot of it is going to end up outside Ukraine. It's going to fund NGOs who will use that money in all kinds of fashions, both in Ukraine and in other places. And there'll be an awful lot of corruption and all of that kind of thing. And that always happens when you have money pouring in on this kind of scale, which is not organically produced. It invariably fosters corruption.
Yep. My concern, this is going to hit the streets of Europe. We're going to see maybe some terrorist organizations get a hold of these and really make a mess in some of these streets. I don't know if that's where some of the artillery has gone in previous wars, but I don't think it's going to be a safe Europe for the next couple of decades. That's for sure. There'll be a lot of animosity as well from this war.
I absolutely agree with that. And can I just say, I mean, he's in an interview he gave in The Economist. I mean, Zelensky actually touched on this and he made it into a threat. He said, if you betray Ukraine, there's millions of Ukrainians now in Europe and they might get very angry with you. He didn't finish the thought, but I mean, it was quite clear, at least to me, what he was alluding to. He was saying, we've got real possibilities that you could have violent trouble from these people in Europe itself.
Cyrus.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just living a very interesting world right now. I mean, we're seeing, I always want to bring in the North America perspective, but, being here is that I think we're seeing a very big tide changing here. And the fact that there's many Americans and Canadians that are very frustrated with the funding that is leaving this country and going there. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of Americans like myself who look at our involvement in Afghanistan and, like what has America really done in Afghanistan or Iraq, to really help those people out or anything. I mean, there was no benefit to us being in Afghanistan for 20 years. And I think what's fascinating is for example, we did have somebody in the comment section earlier in the stream talk about, can you talk about Syria? Syria's president and first lady visiting China and the future, what that will hold. Well, it's interesting because Syria has been absolutely devastated in conflict as well. It's an extremely underdeveloped country, but I think you're seeing them, going to China simply for the fact of, hey, can you help us out? Can you, if there's one country that's going to be building infrastructure and has that potential, it's certainly China. And so that's why China rolled out the red carpet, why they're hosting the president and first lady of Syria, and hopefully, doing something to actually help those people there, which would be amazing. And I think that's what a lot of people, this is why the Belt and Road Initiative has been very successful around the world. Why, for example, China has such a dominating lead in the global South, because it's countries throughout South America, Africa, Latin America, Middle East, Southeast Asia. All of these areas, has been largely neglected from the United States and its Western allies. And now China's coming in and actually offering some tangible assets and some tangible results that actually can make a huge difference. And so I think that's, again, it just kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier in the stream, is the fact that this is a multipolar world. People want options. They want other opportunities. And, when we talked about the chaos of, Alexander mentioned, that doesn't sound very good for the United States as far as representation of the society and how things are going politically. It's not. It's a disaster here. Politics is an absolute. We're at a very difficult point right now. I mean, we are not a democracy anymore. We're an oligarchy here in the United States. And, most Americans have lost faith in this democracy that we have. We are looking that it's going to be another Trump and Biden election, here in the next, election cycle. But it's difficult because I think many Americans are frustrated. We've got 350 million people in this country, and yet here we are again, that it's Trump and Biden is going to be our two options. And I think it's the middle class is being squeezed. Crime is through the roof in major cities in America. I mean, there's so many problems that we can discuss, and it always comes back to, when I'm looking at, I can find articles in foreign policy, and I can find think tanks in the U.S. where people who are brave enough to speak out, simply say the truth. The reality is the United States needs to get its house in order first. We need to look internally. We need to look in the mirror. This is the biggest problem to America, is always internal. But unfortunately, those voices are, they don't get the recognition that they need. They're not silenced, but it's just not promoted as much. And obviously the narrative, and this is why you have, somebody like a Gordon Chang, who's the China, the de facto China expert in America. He's on the news every single day. And I mean, his latest piece was a huge propaganda piece saying that, China is not only going to get ready to attack Taiwan, but simultaneously they're going to be attacking Japan and the United States. That's their new strategy, is this 3-point play where they're going to attack war simultaneously on US, Japan, and Taiwan. And it's like, what planet are you on? But yet this is the guy that's given the spotlight. And he's the one that's brought in as the China expert. And I mean, you can't. No one in Washington D.C. thinks that. I mean, you talk to the most established, and there are some good think tanks that actually are producing some decent data. The Brookings Institute is one of my favorite, where I know Ryan Haas is heading up that as the president. He actually has some very objective views on U.S.-China relations because he lived in China. He speaks Chinese. He was serving under the U.S. Embassy in Beijing for many years under the Obama administration. So he has that firsthand knowledge. And that's where, we need to have more of these rational voices come forward. As far as the war, I mean, it just seems like this is definitely going to be America's next forever war. I don't think there's going to be a conclusion anytime soon. It's buckle up. We're going to have to, we're going to be in this for a long time. But what's the cost of this? The cost of this is that Ukraine, will continue to get wrecked. That country is basically finished. I mean, how do they rebuild after this? It doesn't make sense. So I'm going to, I got to bounce. I got to leave time to get the kids ready to school. So Alexander, thank you guys. Alex, thank you for the great show. We've had over 2,500 people on my channel alone, streaming in. So I want to thank everybody for their time this week, and let's have a great week. And thank you, gentlemen, for your time this morning.
A great pleasure, Cyrus. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We'll wrap it up in a couple of minutes. So last thing, I just wanted to let you guys know that in most of the social circles here, there is quite a bit of support for Russia, but then they skip after that and they move on to their infrastructure, their company, and their countries here. And most people are well connected, whether they're in their early 20s or going into their 30s. They're thinking about business. And that is the focus of the average Chinese person. When you go out for dinner, there won't be this talk about, major social issues or things that are going on in America that raise the eyebrows, or are we going to be attacked by the Americans? Most of them are like, hey, you want to do business? Hey, I've got this new factory opening up next week. My uncle's just brought 300 new employees in. It's a completely different mindset over here. And a funny thing happened. I brought in a couple of friends. They're other content creators. One guy was from America, and one girl was from Russia. And it was the American that got his first visa denied. Not the Russian into China. I thought that was quite comical. Gentlemen, I've been watching your channels, daily for the last year here. I would really like to end the show off, and maybe we can talk a couple more minutes about what you guys really think is the next phase here that's going to be going on with Russia and Ukraine over the winter period. Are we going to see escalation? You guys have the mic from here.
I think that we are going to see an escalation, because I think that the opportunity there was a small window this autumn when there was a chance for negotiations to begin, and this has been completely thrown away. People who discuss negotiations in the West are coming up with ideas which the Russians will never countenance and will never accept. So the result is there have been no negotiations, and there are not going to be any negotiations, and the Ukrainians refuse to consider negotiations either. So the offensive has run its course, is running its course. It's very close to an end. I don't think anybody who really is familiar with the situation on the ground seriously thinks it can be continued by Ukraine over the course of the autumn and the winter. So there is going to be an escalation at some point, and it's going to come from the Russian side, because all the indications are that they're building up their forces now in a very systematic and methodical way, as they tend to do when these sort of situations arise. And at some point over the next few months, and I'm not going to give any time frame because I don't know, I think we will see a major Russian offensive take place. And I think by that point, Ukraine will not be in a strong position to withstand it. There was a comment made today by the Speaker of the Russian Parliament, a man called Volodin, and he said that Ukraine basically has one choice. Either it accepts Russian terms or it ceases to exist as a state. I mean, it could not be more straightforward.
Yeah. And the narrative shift. Degrade Russia, deter China. I think that's where they're going to take us.
Yes.
They're not talking about as long as it takes anymore, or any stuff like that, or defeating Russia. We're going to defeat Russia. We're going to regime change Putin. You don't hear that anymore.
No.
Now it's about just degrading Russia, damaging Russia. It's good for the U.S. It's good for Europe to do this because we need to deter China. So let's keep this thing going. It's all about deterring China. You see, fighting Russia with a Ukraine proxy is about deterring China. That's what you hear them saying now. I think that was actually in the advertisement that you played with the Republicans for Ukraine. Republicans for Ukraine, GOP for Ukraine. And what are they telling the people of Ukraine? What are they telling the soldiers in Ukraine that are dying, that are getting annihilated by the Russian military? You're fighting in order to deter China. That's what you're fighting for now. You're fighting, you're dying so that you can deter China. This stuff will come out there. It'll make its way out there. It'll make its way to Ukraine. And who knows? Maybe there will be some sort of internal collapse in Ukraine. Maybe. It's possible, but I agree with Alexander. The Russians are just going to finish this the way that they feel they need to finish it. Lavrov said as much at the UN General Assembly.
That guy can speak. I think he is one of the greatest.
Yeah.
I mean, he just tells it like it is. Exactly. Gentlemen, last thing, any comments? Patrick Lancaster is now reporting from Azerbaijan, this area. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very, for me personally, I mean, I am engaged in this because I have lots of, I've known many Armenians, and I have an instinctive sympathy from people from Armenia. I think this has been a disastrous affair, very badly mishandled by the current government of Armenia and the Prime Minister of Armenia. And I've been in contact with people in Armenia, and essentially most of them are saying the same thing. What it will mean is that Armenia will lose, obviously, Nagorno-Karabakh. It'll feel less insecure. It'll feel angry. Some of that resentment is going to be channeled against the Russians, who were supposed to have betrayed it. And it will move towards the west, which will leave it more isolated in its region, a region in which it has no real friends now, but it does have some very formidable enemies. So I think this is a bad outcome and a sad outcome. I think Armenia will come through. I think there will come a point where Armenia and Russia will find their way back with each other again. But for Armenia, it's been a major blow. And by contrast, Azerbaijan, the president of Azerbaijan, he is many things, but he's also a very clever man, and he's played his cards with great skill.
Yeah, U.S. aid is in Armenia, I believe, either today or tomorrow. Samantha Power, and U.S. aid. They're going to be in Yerevan, as will the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State as well. Will be there. And Macron came out with a statement the other day, and he said that Russia is the friend of Azerbaijan, France is the friend of Armenia. So, I mean, everything is being exposed now. Pashinyan's game is just right out there in the open.
Yeah,
he's going to try to pivot Armenia into the EU and NATO, and it's going to be a complete freaking disaster for Armenia, because Azerbaijan is not done.
No,
they're not going to finish.
I agree. I should say I completely agree with that. I mean, this is a stage in a conflict because Azerbaijan still has potential territorial claims against Armenia, and they're important claims for Azerbaijan. And so this isn't the end. So Armenia is sacrificing a relationship which has been critically important for Armenia's survival in the past, with two powerful countries, Russia and Iran, that are both its historic friends and are nearby and can help, in reliance on the friendship of countries that are far away and have no means to project power into this region.
It's interesting that nobody stopped it and got involved in this. That's where I find it's quite interesting.
Well, they couldn't.
Yeah.
They could. I mean, I was in Armenia twice just recently, and I'll tell you, I didn't meet one person that spoke favorably of the Pashinyan government. I mean, they spoke of the government with a hatred. Of course, it's anecdotal what I'm saying, but usually when you're in a country and you talk to a lot of people, you'll find a couple of people who are more moderate or who are like, the government they're okay, or, I'm not so hot on the government, but whatever. But in the case of when I was in Yerevan, everybody was cursing the Pashinyan government. They were absolutely cursing the Pashinyan government because, as we have pointed out on the Duran on many videos, Pashinyan recognized that Nagorno-Karabakh was the territory of Azerbaijan. Once you do that, it's over. The game is over. The incursion of Azerbaijan, the invasion of Azerbaijan into Nagorno-Karabakh, the military activity, was just the final stage to Pashinyan's recognition that this territory is theirs. So, can Russia step in? No. Can anyone step in when you have the leader of Armenia saying that this land is those guys? I mean, what would Russia do? They have no right to do anything. And that's what Azerbaijan was telling Russia. That's what Aliyev was telling Putin.
Yeah.
He's saying, look, Pashinyan is saying this is ours. So what are you talking about? Mediation, negotiation. What are you talking about, man? He's like, what are you talking about?
But do we see anything happening with the Georgians in this territory, or are they going to just stay silent and not ruffle anyone's feathers in this area?
There's a lot of talk again about another uprising in Georgia to overthrow the present government, which has been trying to improve relations with Russia gradually and incrementally, and that this uprising is going to come in order to bring Georgia back into line. I have to say, I think that in Georgia, a sort of line has been crossed. There's been many attempts to try and stage these uprisings against this Georgian government, and it not only survives, and it gets, with every attempt to overthrow it that it defeats, it seems to get a bit more solid and a bit stronger. So I think that probably it will survive any such attempts. And it has been working very, very carefully and very gradually to try to improve relations with the Russians. Because, again, they understand better than Pashinyan does, perhaps, that for countries like Georgia and Armenia, the Russians are the only real big player around who might conceivably be useful to them and helpful to them if there's a crisis. And of course, which is vital, the relationship with Russia is vital for the economic future of these countries. They're very small. Much of their population actually live in Russia as a part of this, as diaspora people there. So it's not possible really for these countries to break the connections with Russia completely, to sever them, because doing so would be not just catastrophic, but conceivably even existential. So I think the Georgians understand that, or at least the Georgian government understands that. I think the Armenians have some way to go before they realize it again. But I think they will one day, because, to be frank, Armenia has gone through some very difficult periods in its history, and it's come through, and I'm confident that it will once more.
Last question, since I got you guys on the screen, I have to ask you this. How pissed off are the Polish? Are they really pissed off about this grain deal? I mean, if they had it, is this gonna, when they say they're not gonna give any more support, do they mean it? And is this something that's gonna, break the camel's back in this area?
Well, I think if you're talking about Polish public opinion, yes, I think they have had it. I think they've I mean, bear in mind, it's easier for them to understand Zelensky. I mean, he's close to them, his fellow Slav nation and all this. And of course, they have millions of Ukrainian refugees amongst them. And of course, the farmers have had to absorb all the grain. And I think they have had enough of this. And I think many, many Poles have been much more skeptical about this whole thing from the start than, people in the West perhaps have understood. And I think this has now boiled over and risen to the surface. Now, if the present government is re-elected in October, because it has its own agendas in Western Ukraine, it might, pivot back. But the mask has fallen, if you like. This illusion of great friendship between Ukraine and Poland, I think, has basically been buried. And this a sign of how angry many Poles feel about the whole Ukraine thing is this, which is on his way back from Canada to Ukraine. Zelensky stopped over in Poland, and not a single official of the Polish government met him. I mean, he met people there. He had decorated some volunteers. I didn't hear that. But the entire Polish government just would have nothing to do with him. And they're very, very angry. They've said that they're very, very angry about this event at the Canadian Parliament that you and Alex were talking about.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate your time. I know you guys got a busy schedule. Once again, thanks everyone for joining the program. And for all the viewers today, do not forget to subscribe to both of these gentlemen's channels, Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou, and plus the Duran. I've put all the links in the description below, and I will pin it as soon as this video is over, where to find these great gentlemen that have amazing coverage. Thank you so much, guys. We'll be talking to you guys soon. All right, take care.